I caught my wife cheating with our wedding planner on our wedding day. Can you believe she chose the most important day to do that? I've met many women in my life, but none as disgusting and foolish as the woman who's now my wife. Can you grasp the seriousness of this situation? There's no greater disrespect than sinking so low on your own wedding day. My fellow Redditors, I won't just sit idly by as if nothing happened. I'm incredibly fortunate to have discovered the truth, and trust me, she will face the consequences. It was dangerously close, so close that I almost remained unaware of the true nature of the incident. If I had been one of those men blindly in love, I'd have been devastated. I'm grateful I didn't heed my misguided friends who told me not to be suspicious of my partner. I don't subscribe to the idea of trusting a woman so much that you ignore obvious signs. I'd rather end a relationship due to my partner disliking my vigilance than discover I've been cheated on. Nothing is more crushing than finding out that the man you hired to plan your wedding has been involved with your wife. In a way, I've been paying this man to be with the woman I intended to marry. Well, technically, I'm already married to her, which makes this situation even worse. The revelation of such deceit is incredibly infuriating. I can't help but wonder if my friends were in on it, as they consistently dismissed my suspicions about my wife. Whenever I brought it up, they'd advise me to forget it and focus on the wedding. Let me clarify something. I only noticed signs of my wife's infidelity a day before our wedding. Why didn't I call it off? As I mentioned, I saw signs, but I wasn't sure. She didn't reveal anything. I couldn't abruptly cancel a wedding with over 150 guests just based on uncertain signs. This is where I place blame on both our families. The pressure people impose on you before your wedding blinds you because you can't fathom canceling all the plans you've made. Before I delve into my experience, let me provide some background on my relationship with my wife and how we met. I'm Daniel, a 29-year-old man married to Andrea, a 27-year-old woman. I met Andrea at a friend's wedding, and the ironic part is that I had brought a date to the wedding. Curious about how I ended up leaving the wedding with Andrea. Things got a bit complicated at the wedding reception. The couple we were celebrating were known for their love of partying and having a good time, so naturally, their wedding had a wide array of drinks and shots. We drank, and honestly, we nearly crossed our limits. I can handle my alcohol quite well, to be honest, but I have no idea what they put in those drinks. That day, I got drunk for the first time in my life. I wasn't the only one. Everyone, including the couple, got drunk. Andrea was part of the group of revelers, and that's how we started talking. I don't even know what happened to my date that night, or how I ended up in my apartment with Andrea. The next morning hit me like a bucket of ice water. I had a one-night stand with Andrea. While one-night stands are not uncommon, it was a big deal for me, as I'm very selective about the people I interact with. The fact that I left my date and went home with Andrea was a testament to how intoxicated I must have been that night. My date never contacted me again after that day, leaving me single. Surprisingly, Andrea messaged me the day after she left my apartment in the morning. I was taken aback because I couldn't recall asking her for her phone number. So folks, here's the truth. Andrea actually took my phone number from my phone that night. Yes, my wife was the one who initiated contact. I admired her confidence. And that's how our conversation began. We occasionally hooked up, but things quickly escalated, and we officially started dating. We were together for 4 years, but let me tell you, it was an on and off relationship. Our first 2 years weren't very stable. We'd break up and then reconcile, and the cycle continued. Strangely, it felt like she was my soulmate because we always found our way back to each other. We had a solid 2-year relationship before we decided to tie the knot. I proposed, and she said yes. That's where our journey began. Honestly, wedding preparations can be quite the test of a couple's compatibility. If they can endure the stress of planning and family disagreements, it's a good sign they're committed. Our wedding preparations were quite hectic, to be honest. Our families were polar opposites in terms of preferences, which made planning a nightmare. Her family wanted a grand wedding, while mine preferred an intimate one. I had to assert that my wife and I had the final say in how our wedding would unfold. Eventually, Andrea and I settled on a wedding that wasn't too big or too small. We trimmed the guest list down to 150 people, finding a compromise. Now let's get to the crux of the matter. The wedding planner who was involved with my wife. Traditionally, women tend to take the lead in wedding planning, striving for perfection and realizing their dreams. I didn't mind Andrea taking charge of the wedding preparations. In fact, the wedding turned out larger than I had originally wanted. Her family initially aimed for a guest list of 250 people. I have no idea how they knew that many folks. We managed to bring it down to 150 because I expressed discomfort with such a large gathering. My initial preference was just 90 guests. Having so many people only increased the workload, but Andrea insisted she could handle it. I didn't mind as long as we had a wedding, although Andrea wanted something grander and more extravagant. She spent nights scrolling through screens, searching for the perfect wedding theme. Initially, I tried to let her handle it independently, but eventually I decided to get involved, not because I wanted to, but to support her and avoid overwhelming her. Despite my willingness to assist, Andrea assured me that she could manage on her own and didn't need help. I gave up trying because I had limited time to spare. Andrea selected the wedding planner and I covered the expenses. That was our agreement. However, I never anticipated that this arrangement would lead to deception and infidelity. My fellow Redditors, the wedding planner, happened to be a man. This surprised me because I was not accustomed to male wedding planners. I had always associated wedding planners with women, and this was a new experience for me. I didn't suspect infidelity just because he was a man. It was more about doubting his competence for the job. I questioned Andrea about her choice, and she assured me that he was an excellent wedding planner with a strong reputation in the industry. I didn't have much knowledge about wedding planners and their social presence, so I didn't dig deeper. His design proposals showed his competence, and he even aced a test my sister prepared. I had no issues with hiring him as long as he was skilled at his job. I had confidence in myself and didn't feel threatened by having a male wedding planner. Little did I know that this wedding planner was engaging in an affair with Andrea. In hindsight, I find the whole situation quite ironic. This man was practically having an affair with Andrea, and I only discovered it on our wedding day. To be precise, I found out barely an hour after our wedding and just before our reception. I'll delve into the details later. What truly bothers me is the fact that it's common for wedding planners and brides to spend a significant amount of time together. They need to choose a dress that complements the decor and find the perfect veil that doesn't clash with the color scheme. Their collaboration is essential to ensure the bride's satisfaction. As for the groom, it's mostly about selecting the right suit and tie, with no involvement in lipstick colors or jewelry choices. Consequently, I had very limited interaction with the wedding planner. During our wedding preparations, I took a leave from work, but I still had to attend Zoom meetings and manage work on my computer. Financially speaking, wedding expenses can be exorbitant, and nobody really cares about the total spent. They just want everything to be perfect. I was in a similar situation, needing to work because I understood that life continues after the wedding and we would need to support ourselves. I don't consider myself overly strict, but I do value intentionality. I don't like idleness or beating around the bush. Therefore, I didn't hesitate to advise Andrea to be more mindful of her spending. She was splurging recklessly and I couldn't overlook it. I cautioned her to cut back on unnecessary expenses. Andrea had taken an entire month off from work, which meant she wasn't receiving her regular salary. I had to make her realize that money isn't limitless. To be clear, I'm not a miserly person, and I'm willing to spend on my wife, but I do believe in responsible financial management. I stand by what I said, and I don't see anything wrong with encouraging sensible spending, especially with money that isn't earned. For example, Andrea wanted our reception on a yacht. I wouldn't have minded if the guest list was under 50 people, but accommodating 150 guests on a yacht was excessively costly. I firmly insisted on having the wedding reception at a hotel, leaving no room for debate. Andrea's reaction to my decision was unexpected. Her behavior took a turn for the worse, becoming incredibly spoiled and disruptive just 2 weeks before our wedding. Andrea's attitude became rude and rebellious, prompting me to express my anger and warn her that I might end the relationship if she didn't change her ways. She became fearful and apologized, and I believed she would keep her word. However, she did so in a deceitful manner. Even though Andrea's overreactions and attitude subsided, I still confided in my friends about her behavior, expressing my dissatisfaction and explaining my concerns. If she had exhibited such behavior before we began planning the wedding, I would have made a decision without consulting anyone. However, I gave her the benefit of the doubt because I understood the stress associated with wedding planning. I was experiencing stress myself and recognized how the pressure to excel and create a perfect event could temporarily alter one's personality. My friends dismissed my worries, attributing them to the normal crankiness that women may experience during wedding preparations. They shared their own similar experiences and reassured me not to be overly concerned. Little did I know that my own experience would be marred by a cheating scandal. Another reason I didn't confront Andrea more aggressively was that I felt guilty for leaving most of the planning to her. I made several attempts to help, but she declined, insisting that she could handle it on her own. She often rejected my ideas and assistance, claiming that I was adding to her stress, which discouraged me and led me to let her take charge of what she wanted. As our wedding day neared, Andrea reverted to her normal self. She ceased her attitude and became more receptive to my input. I didn't find this change unusual because I believed that the wedding stress was subsiding. I stopped prying into her affairs and ceased my suspicions. However, 2 days before our wedding, everything I had assumed was true came into question. We had already checked into our hotel and were preparing for bed when Andrea received a sudden phone call and hastily left the room to answer it. This struck me as odd because we typically answered calls together, even for work-related matters. There were times when we put calls on speakerphone so both of us could listen to the conversation. I became suspicious when Andrea didn't answer the call in my presence. I felt both angry and irritated. Without hesitation, I left the room to search for her, unconcerned about how she might react to me following her. A wedding was a serious matter, and I needed to ensure my wife understood that. I discovered her in the hallway, speaking quietly on the phone, and that's when I lost my temper. I approached her and tried to take the phone from her hand. She immediately ended the call and asked why I interrupted her conversation. I questioned why she couldn't have taken the call in the room, and she claimed she didn't want to disturb me. I reassured her that I didn't mind, and she was well aware of that. Andrea attempted to dismiss it by citing fatigue and the need to go to bed, but I wasn't buying it. My fellow Redditors, I was determined to find out what the call was about. Andrea grew annoyed and explained that she was talking to a relative who needed directions to the hotel. It was a flimsy excuse, and I expressed my disbelief. This is to illustrate how vigilant I had been, yet I still ended up being fooled in the end. I made it clear to Andrea that her suspicious behavior was causing me to have doubts about the wedding. She became upset when I mentioned this and insisted she had been speaking with a relative. She even went so far as to show me the call log, where the number was saved as Aunt. Well, my fellow Redditors, I later discovered that her aunt had a beard and resembled a man. Oh wait, he looked like our wedding planner. He was our wedding planner. It's hard to believe I fell for such a lame excuse that day. Of course, I believed her and moved on. How was I supposed to suddenly realize she was lying to me? It's ironic when you think about it. Sometimes you find yourself in highly unfavorable situations, and I can attest to that. It's always frustrating. There's nothing more aggravating than being blindsided and repeatedly lied to. Everything only becomes clear when you discover the truth. But before the truth is revealed, it feels like you're navigating a confusing maze without knowing the way. One day before my wedding, I felt like I was lost in a maze because Andrea was casting doubt on many things. My fellow Redditors, imagine what was going through my mind when I noticed these signs just 24 hours before tying the knot. The wedding preparations were in full swing, and guests had started arriving, including my co-workers, distant and close relatives, and even my boss. Everything appeared to be going smoothly that day until Andrea raised another concern. I wasn't worried about her, but rather about potentially embarrassing myself in front of so many people. I needed to understand why Andrea was nowhere to be found a day before our wedding. Yes, Reddit, you read that correctly. Andrea had essentially disappeared from the room, and I hadn't seen her for quite some time. Anyone I asked informed me that she had gone shopping for a last-minute wedding design. I wasn't comfortable with that explanation at all. The wedding planner should have been responsible for such tasks. When I inquired why the wedding planner hadn't gone to get it, they informed me that he had accompanied Andrea. Yes, I'm presenting you with the facts. Andrea left the hotel with the wedding planner to obtain whatever design she needed. You can imagine how furious I was that day. I was genuinely angry. I didn't appreciate the fact that Andrea had left the hotel with the wedding planner without informing me first. It seemed like she was making decisions without consulting me. She acted without considering me. If I had left the hotel without her knowledge, I might have been labeled as the heartless fiancé who doesn't keep his fiancée informed of his whereabouts. But Andrea didn't think twice before taking her actions. Even then, I didn't suspect that Andrea was cheating on me. I didn't even suspect any connection between her and the wedding planner. This just highlights how secretive they had been. I know some of you might say I was foolish not to notice the signs, but that's because you already know where this is going. I didn't know at that time. I couldn't even fathom it. It's like a woman discovering her husband is having an affair with her best friend, who also happens to be her chief bridesmaid. Let's say she witnessed them together on numerous occasions, yet didn't suspect a thing until she learned about their actual affair. That's similar to my situation. I never entertained the idea of my wife being involved with our wedding planner. It's not an everyday occurrence. When Andrea returned with the wedding planner that day, I pulled her aside and we had a heated argument. I asked her where she had been, and she explained it was for wedding-related matters. I questioned why she hadn't informed me, and she claimed it slipped her mind. This time I didn't let it slide. I was so upset that I even suggested she might not want to get married anymore. She was taken aback and asked why I would imply such a thing. We had a lengthy argument that day, and eventually she apologized and promised to be more considerate. It's not ideal to argue a day before your wedding, but it's not uncommon. I've witnessed such disagreements at many weddings I've attended. Andrea begged for my forgiveness, blaming wedding stress for her forgetfulness. After some contemplation, I decided to forgive her. I could see that she was genuinely stressed with the wedding preparations, but now I realized that much of her stress was due to her secret affair while planning the wedding. She's the one to blame for how things unfolded. She made poor, deceitful choices, thinking she could keep them hidden. Now let me tell you what transpired on the wedding day and how I discovered her infidelity with the wedding planner. Our wedding day arrived, and we were filled with excitement. You know that sense of fulfillment when everything you've worked hard for is finally unfolding right before your eyes? It brings contentment and deep gratitude. I felt exactly that way. Personally, I had invested a significant amount of money into the wedding, so seeing how it all came together was incredibly satisfying. The day before the wedding, I had a bachelor party, and Andrea had her bridal shower. It was like a reenactment of how we first met. Just like that day, we both got a little too carried away with drinking and spent the night together. I woke up with a hangover on my wedding day, but fortunately, I managed to have some hot soup that helped alleviate it. In the morning, I didn't see Andrea as she was busy preparing for the wedding. I too dedicated time to getting ready. It was heartwarming to see our families gathered together. They all appeared genuinely happy for us, and I was grateful that they could be a part of our special day. If I recall correctly, there were more than 150 people at the wedding that day. Thankfully, I had opted not to have the wedding on a yacht, so I wasn't overwhelmed by the crowd. After exchanging vows at the church, we had some time to rest before heading to the reception. Andrea needed to change her dress, and I also wanted to freshen up. The reception hall had been set up, and some guests were already making their way there. Following my shower and a change of clothes, I set out to find Andrea. I had forgotten to give her the bracelet I purchased for her the night before. I thought it would complement her reception dress beautifully. It took me a bit of time to locate Andrea's room as I hadn't seen it in the morning. We had separated to get dressed and had chosen different rooms for our preparations. As I was searching for her room, I couldn't contain my excitement about becoming a married man. I found myself reminiscing about the journey we'd been through before reaching this point, particularly how we had first met at a friend's party. I was practically strolling down memory lane that day. I had to inquire with a hotel staff member about the location of Andrea's room before being directed there. I was so thrilled that I even forgot to knock on the door. I pushed the door open with anticipation, but my excitement vanished immediately as I saw what lay before me. I never expected to witness what I did that day. In a million years, I couldn't have imagined my own wife sprawled on the bed in her wedding dress with the wedding planner I was paying for completely unclothed on top of her. It felt like the world had come to a standstill waiting for me to process the shocking sight. Andrea's wedding gown, a dress I had paid for, was torn. They were engaged in intercourse right before my eyes, completely lost in the act. It took a few seconds for Andrea to notice my presence, and I still remember the infinitesimal widening of her eyes as she quickly pushed the wedding planner away. It was then that I could fully grasp the disastrous state of her dress. She looked disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her hair a mess. She attempted to speak, but I grabbed a glass of water from near the door and hurled it onto the bed in a fit of anger and disgust. I was seething, absolutely livid, and it took all my self-control not to aim that glass at their heads. Without second thoughts, I slapped the wedding planner across the face. The guy couldn't have been older than 24 at most, and he had a slim, almost effeminate appearance. I had even assumed he might be not straight. But no, the young man I had hired to plan my wedding was having an affair with my wife. The worst part? They hadn't even bothered to use protection. I seized him by the shoulders and delivered a swift kick to his groin. Yes, fellow Redditors, I kicked him right there. Andrea leaped out of bed and began pleading with me, uttering apologies and excuses, but I didn't have the patience to listen to her. I called out to my elder brother, whose room was just a few doors away, repeatedly until he rushed into the room. He too was stunned by what he saw. He hurried to my side and asked if what he was witnessing was real. I confirmed that it was, feeling utterly disgusted, irritated, and profoundly let down. There are no words to convey the depth of my disgust for Andrea and the wedding planner. I felt betrayed, but at that moment, everything began to fall into place. I finally understood why Andrea had sneaked out of the hotel the day before to buy something. It all made sense, but it was too late. There was nothing I could do because I was already married to her, a cheater who dared to betray me on our wedding day. I couldn't even bear to look at Andrea or hear her speak, and that's when I began devising my plan. I didn't care if we were already married or anything of the sort. I needed to make her regret her actions, to make her tremble with fear at the mere mention of my name or whenever she came close to me. There was no way I could pretend I hadn't just witnessed what had unfolded before my eyes. I had no reason to protect a marriage that showed no respect for me. A single glance at my brother, and he understood my intentions immediately. He could tell that I intended to humiliate them, so he asked me what to do. I instructed him to apprehend the wedding planner while I took hold of Andrea. He followed my orders, and that's how we forcibly removed them from the room. My fellow Redditors, I'm sure you're all curious about what we did to them. Well, in that moment, I did what I could think of to deliver a humiliating blow. I wanted to shatter their pride to the maximum extent possible. You know what's ironic? The extensive guest list that Andrea and her family had been so adamant about ended up playing into my hands. With over 150 people in attendance, they hadn't heeded my warnings. But guess what? It backfired on them in the end. All the guests were already waiting for us at the reception, so my brother and I escorted them to the reception hall. The wedding planner begged me to let him at least put on his pants, but I refused. Yes, I refused. He didn't just stand there passively, he attempted to resist. That's when I called upon two of my friends who had come along to look for me, asking why we were taking so long. So, my fellow Redditors, 3 men dragged the wedding planner to the reception, while I led Andrea and followed behind. She wept, wailed, and begged for my forgiveness, but I paid her no attention, treating her as the disgrace she had become. I didn't care about her disheveled attire, messy hair, or nearly exposed chest. She had no shame, so she shouldn't mind being humiliated in front of the guests. Everyone in the room stood up immediately upon seeing us. The shock on their faces was evident. They had come to witness a wedding, but instead, they were confronted with an unclothed man and a nearly unclothed woman, the very woman who was supposed to be the bride. Andrea's family rushed towards us, displaying obvious concern on their faces. My fellow Redditors, they looked horrified. They attempted to shield her, and her father had the audacity to inquire if she had lost her mind. I paid them no mind and pushed Andrea onto the stage alongside the wedding planner. My parents tried to communicate with me and understand what was happening, but I ignored them as well. I was too furious to act rationally or explain anything to anyone. My focus was solely on what I needed to do. As I moved to take the microphone from the MC, Andrea attempted to flee, but my brother managed to stop her in time. Even the wedding planner didn't dare to budge. He simply crouched down, covering his face in embarrassment, fully aware of his nakedness. His only saving grace was a towel that one of his employees threw to him, which he hastily used to cover himself. Using the microphone, I revealed to everyone that I had just discovered my newlywed wife in a compromising situation with the wedding planner in her hotel room, when she should have been changing into her reception attire. My fellow Redditors, I can still recall the gasps that reverberated throughout the hall that day. Before I could even utter the next sentence, people reached for their phones, eager to capture the unfolding spectacle. For the first time in my life, I was grateful for the massive crowd in attendance. I proceeded to divulge how Andrea must have been involved with the wedding planner for an extended period. Some people had the audacity to suggest that I should have prevented her from hiring the wedding planner. I scoffed at them and branded them as cowards. It's absurd to blame me for someone else's poor choices. You can't stop a person determined to cheat. They don't need excuses. Cheaters make their decisions while in full control of their faculties. Andrea tried to deflect the blame by bringing up an incident when I went on a date the night we initially met. I had to clarify that I wasn't even in a relationship with the girl I was with. She was my date for the wedding, and we were still in the early stages of getting to know each other. I wasn't dating her, engaged to her, or married to her. Andrea was so taken aback that she had to shield her face from the cameras. In that moment, I realized I was through with her, so I promptly left the reception hall. Fortunately, I hadn't paid the remaining balance to the wedding planner for his services. I wasn't foolish enough to do that. Accompanied by my brother, I went to Andrea's hotel room and collected all the dresses she had purchased for the reception, along with her jewelry, shoes, bags, and her purse. I sold everything a week later and pocketed the money for myself. After all, I had footed the entire wedding bill. While I may have lost money on the reception, I managed to recover my losses through the sale of the designer items. That's how my wedding concluded 2 weeks ago, folks. Talk about a plot twist, right? I decided to share this story on Reddit because I'm still reeling from the events. I haven't seen Andrea since that day, and I have no intentions of doing so anytime soon. I filed for divorce the day after the wedding, and after navigating through the necessary procedures, our marriage will soon be a thing of the past. I believe it's safe to say that I had one of the worst weddings imaginable. I'm just grateful that I discovered the truth in time. It may have been late, but it could have been far worse. If she can cheat on our wedding day, what else is she capable of? I liberated myself from the marriage, and in a matter of days, I'll be legally single and free. Thank you for taking the time to read about my harrowing experience. I hope you can glean some valuable insights from it.